Welcome to another episode of Legendiary. On this episode, we're going to be interviewing Ahmed Shihab-Eldin. Ahmed's an Emmy-nominated journalist and senior correspondent for AJ+. After graduating with honors from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, he then taught at his alma mater as an adjunct professor at the young age of 24. Ahmed was featured on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list of young disruptors, innovators, and media entrepreneurs impatient to change the world. He was also featured on the Arabian Business Power list of the planet's 100 most influential young Arabs. Following Ahmed's career has always been a source of inspiration for me. His work has impacted not only myself, but millions around the world. Join me as Ahmed Shihab-Eldin shares his narrative to inspire. Who is Ahmed Eldin?
I don't know. I'm Ahmed Shihab-Eldin.
Who is Ahmed Shihab-Eldin?
I think at my core, I am an inherently curious child who's constantly looking for ways to connect to people and to the world around him.
Tell us, what is the earliest childhood memory that's so prominent in your head and the impact it had on how you decided what career you want to take in life?
I grew up all over. I grew up mostly in Egypt, but also in Kuwait and the U.S. And we used to spend every summer in California because my dad had taught there, and I was born in Berkeley, California. So this summer, like every summer, we landed in California, and it just so happened that it was, I think, the day before the troops crossed the border from Iraq to Kuwait. I remember that summer was different than any other summer. You know, I was about 7 years old, so for me it was very confusing because there was my mother who never watched TV. Watching TV, I would see all this destruction, and in the background, you know, I would recognize like the roundabouts in Kuwait and the monuments and what have you, but I didn't quite grasp what was happening, except that there was sadness all around me, and there was a sense of despair, and my parents were on edge constantly. As I was trying to figure out what was happening as a 7-year-old, there was a TV crew who came to my house, and they started interviewing my parents. You know, what does it feel like? And my mom had, you know, because she's artistic, had launched this campaign to drum up support in America to help end the war. And I remember she came, this woman, the reporter was a woman. And I remember she was very, you know, sweet in her demeanor and in her line of questioning, but it felt to me invasive. But I was fascinated by the fact that there was a stranger, she was Asian, I remember, that there's this stranger in the house, you know, asking us questions about something very personal to me. She was asking me about my grandmother because she knew and she had heard from my parents that my family was still there. And I remember looking at this lady and thinking, why the hell does she care about my grandmother? How does she even know who my grandmother is? All of a sudden I got very protective. And there was something in this moment that sparked this idea of connection, which has been kind of a guiding force in my career, because I felt like she was trying to connect with me and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand the premise or the construct of, you know, this stranger coming into our home. Why would she care? Why did she even want to know these things? What was the point? Look at what's happening to my country. Look at what's happening. It was in that moment that I remembered thinking, as much as I was somewhat offended by her presence, I was so appreciative on a very fundamental level that someone cared. Because I remember being at school and trying to explain to people at the age of 7 what was happening. And people didn't care. They didn't get it. They didn't have the context to get it. And I think that's why a lot of my work focuses around giving people context to understand what's happening around the world, rather than just telling the story itself. Because, you know, she was looking for context, I realize now. And I think it was that moment that triggered something in me that said, I kind of want to be like that really pushy woman.
Throughout your youth, did you think you wanted to go into journalism, or did you have other like passions that, you know, you didn't realize that were going to end up being a different career? And when did you make that prominent decision that, okay, I'm going into journalism?
It was all kind of a mistake. I would love to sit here and tell you that, yes, in that moment I decided that this is what I was going to do.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to perform. I loved performing, and I loved expressing myself, and I loved telling stories. Growing up, I also had ADHD, or so the American doctors would tell my mother, who then would say, no, that's impossible. Like, because when they would say he needs medication, she'd be like, my son? No. So the ADHD caused for me a lot of distraction at a young age. So I was kind of always moving between different ideas of what I wanted to do. What specifically led me to becoming a journalist and to going to Columbia was a big mistake. Basically, I went to Boston University for undergrad, and I started in advertising. The reason was because my mom was in advertising, and growing up I really admired, my dad's a nuclear physicist, and I admired him too, but there was no way that I was going to be a nuclear physicist, so I kind of gave up on that. As children, we often model our parents' behavior, or at least I looked up to both of them, and so I wanted to kind of be like them in some ways. I aspired to be similar to them. And my mom in particular, she's a very powerful person with a soul that tends to attract people to her. And I, at a young age, recognized that and wanted to kind of have that same power, if you will. You know, we all have superpowers, and that's hers. I remember I had a professor when I was in Boston, my first or second year, who told me to stay after class. And, you know, there I was thinking he was going to tell me something positive because I was a good student, good enough. And he said, hey, Ahmed, have a seat, blah, blah, blah. You're very talented, great guy. I love your background. Tell me more about you. And as I was talking, he's like, well, I'm going to stop you right there. I said, what? He said, I have some news for you. I said, what? He said, you're talented, you're ambitious, but you suck at advertising.
Wow.
And I remember in that moment feeling very offended because I had in my mind decided this was my path. And you know, when you're young, we're all looking for our path. Right. And I was convinced this was my path. So when he told me that, I remember walking home, and it was cold, and I hate the cold, and it was Boston, so you know the snow was falling horizontal. I remember walking by the Daily Free Press, which was one of the most notable student newspapers in America at Boston University. And they had a little sign in the window that said, writers wanted. And I loved to write growing up. I used to write poetry all the time, and I used to write short stories, and I just loved to write diaries and stuff like that. So I walked in, talked to the editor. They gave me one assignment. Long story short, I started writing. I started going to cover small events in Boston, the mayor's office, City Hall, this, that. And soon I stopped doing my schoolwork. And it was an amazing excuse to not do my schoolwork because I was so enthralled with this process of I can go anywhere in this city and talk to anyone because now I have this like permission because I'm a journalist for this school newspaper. And it took over a life of its own. I think I was good at it, and you know, when you're good at something at a young age, it can really give you a sense of self. And I just realized that I love to do this, so I applied to, over the years, I kept doing it, and I applied to grad school at Columbia. My sister had gone to Columbia. I knew it was a really good school. They have an amazing journalism program. Part of me wanted to please my parents, specifically my father, who would have preferred for me to be in engineering or in science or something like that. But so I applied, I got in, and it was when I got serious about life because I realized, it was the first time in my life that I realized people might have seen something in me that I at the time didn't see in myself. And that was a huge motivator for me to live up to my potential.
You also taught at Columbia University. Yeah. So guide us through this, being at such a young age in your 20s, teaching, you know, in a class where everyone there is like probably twice your age.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So after Columbia, did you start to like realize that this is the path I'm on, it's the right path because of all the things that unfolded? Or was there always continuous questioning and doubt, even though you were like, you know, accumulating all these successes that the majority would agree to be someone on the path to becoming the journalist of the year? Or
you know, it's a good question because in retrospect, I realize now that part of why I had this relative success at a young age, which is what you're describing, is because I never stopped to question what I was doing, and I wasn't one of those people who had something specific set in mind. When I got to Columbia, there were a lot of people who were there with a specific plan. They wanted to be on TV. They wanted to be the next Anderson Cooper or the next Diane Sawyer, or they knew that they wanted to have their own radio show. For me, what was motivating me to do the work I did and to apply myself the way I did at Columbia was just this sense of ambition, drive, and curiosity about the world around me. And I know that sounds general and vague, but what I'm trying to say is my success surprised me because I was never focused on being successful. What I was focused on was connecting with people, with myself, challenging myself. I had a real desire to learn. It was also right after 9/11, a couple of years after 9/11, there was a climate of, fear and suspicion around anything Muslim, anybody named Ahmed, especially the Palestinian identity, which, made me a target of suspicion. And I was very cognizant of this because in Boston I had been arrested and I had been targeted by the police just by virtue of my background and being named Ahmed. And I don't like talking about this because it might sound like I'm being a bit of a victim.
Mm-hmm.
But, Arab Americans right after 9/11 were victimized and were demonized and were vilified. And I realized that my identity and a big part of who I am and how I was raised was off-putting to people, scared people, and limited opportunities for me because of the political and social climate in the country. So to bring it back to Columbia, when I arrived at Columbia, I was hungry. And I was hungry to prove, not just as an individual, what I could accomplish and what I had to offer, but as a representative of my culture and my people, who had been misrepresented, not just Palestinians, but Arabs and Islam. Despite my not being religious myself, it became a badge of honor. And it became one that really defined, I think, my ambition and my drive, which had already existed, but all of a sudden now was amplified by this resistance that I had kept encountering. And all of these disparate things, I think, led to the faculty recognizing that there was something in me that was beyond my capabilities of knowing how to design and do technology and do some of the data things that were just starting to become relevant in the digital journalism space. Like back then, new media and social media and Twitter was still very, very, very preliminary in the field. People didn't understand it. But I had a background in technology. So that, coupled with my Arabic-speaking skills, made me a desirable candidate to get jobs. And I don't know, I was unapologetic. I was unapologetic about what I wanted to do, about my ambitions, and about who I was. And I think that resonated with the faculty. And so, when they asked me to teach, I was shocked. I mean, I was already shocked that I had gotten into Columbia. A part of me felt like, well, what do I know? What can I teach these people? And it was a technical thing that they wanted me to teach at first. It was about aggregation and digital media and new media. And, I was in the right place at the right time, I guess, with the right attitude.
When you say you were bold and unapologetic and wanting to prove, that took you somewhere, especially at that one incident where you gave a speech. And we discussed this prior to the interview, that it gave you a feeling of, let's say, euphoria, right? Like your career was going to go to the next level. And it did. And I want to know a couple of things asking this question. One, did it pay off to be unapologetic and bold? And did it fulfill you on the inside?
From the moment I graduated at Columbia, before they asked me to teach and before everything, I got a job at PBS for the summer. Then I got a job at the New York Times for 8 months. I realized that wasn't for me. Then I got a job at Al Jazeera. I moved to Qatar. I was watching something on Al Jazeera at like 3 a.m. and I was like, oh my God, I want to do this kind of storytelling. And so then I just poured my all into that. So what I'm trying to get at is one thing led to another. I was at a point where I was a 24-year-old journalist with all of a sudden a live international talk show on one of the biggest media networks, Al Jazeera English, in 250 million homes around the world. I had never been on TV. I had never aspired to be on TV. I never thought in my wildest dreams. There are people who work in the business towards getting their own talk show, and I never even thought I would want to have a talk show. But why? Because timing is everything. the Arab world was going through a social and political revolution of upheaval. All of a sudden, after decades of things seeming impossible in terms of change, in terms of hope for, governments to actually represent the interests of the people. You remember maybe there was, all of a sudden, young people in the Arab world were rising up, and in the West they were trying to understand it. And there I was, a young 20-something-year-old who speaks Arabic, who lives there, who understands the culture. So this is what I mean by timing was everything. People needed a bridge, not just in the media world, but in general, to help them understand this crazy social phenomenon that was unfolding in the Arab world. And there I was. And I wasn't even aware in the moment of how significant a time this was in the history of our region, but also in my life. Mm-hmm. And the day that we launched our show, we had preparing for 6 months for this show. Osama bin Laden was killed at 10 p.m. the night before our show was supposed to launch. And our show was a talk show about the news of the day. So we had prepared for like a week or two, we're going to prepare, and we know what to do. And then at 10 p.m. I'm sitting there watching TV on MSNBC, and all the news anchors are like, oh, we have news, we're breaking news, we can't say, it's about Afghanistan, oh no, we don't know, Chris, are we allowed to say, do we have the permission? And I was like, what's happening? I went on Twitter, and before the news broke on CNN and MSNBC, by virtue of my obsessive compulsive Twitter skills, I managed to realize, they killed Osama bin Laden. Anyway, my point is that show, we ended up booking the guy who was 300 meters away from where the raid happened in Abbottabad, and we booked the guy who was live tweeting it seems like something weird's happening in my little village in Abbottabad. And what he was live tweeting unknowingly was the U.S. Special Forces attacking and killing bin Laden. And we booked the guy on our show, we killed ourselves to get him on air. And so we launched this TV show with the one person in the world, I kid you not, who every journalist was trying to book. Because he was the only person with any first-hand, in journalism, you always want to go directly to the source. So, again...
Wow, timing.
Yeah, man, timing, right? And so a couple weeks after that, I got mono. And I was always tired, I didn't understand why. And then I got this amazing opportunity. And part of the reason I got the opportunity, because we managed to book this guy, so we had this huge splash. And the point is, I was there at Google Zeitgeist, feeling completely out of place. So much self-doubt. And it was the first time I was there to tell my story. My story being the story that represented the story of millions of young Arabs around the world who were all of a sudden demanding dignity, demanding representation, which they hadn't had for so long. And of course, for an American Western audience, it wasn't lost on me that this story and this narrative was very appealing, right? I remember walking off stage, and Bill Clinton's in the audience, and I don't know who, and Ariana Huffington's in the front row. I remember catching her eye. This is back when she was kind of the be-all, end-all queen of media. And I walked away, and I was going, of course, to smoke a cigarette, because back then I was still smoking, because I was stupid. All of a sudden, someone taps me on my shoulder, literally. I turn around, and there's Ariana Huffington in my face. Ahmed, what would it take to lure you away from Al Jazeera? First sentence. And I remember looking at her, and what do you... I was like, oh, thank you. And then I was like, and she's like, no, really, what do you want? I need you on my team. And I was like, double my salary. And then she was like, okay, done. And she had her helper next to her. And then she said, what else? And I said, and I had a frustration in my current job that I didn't have enough editorial control, right, over the subject matter that we were covering. So I said, give me control editorially over this project you want me to do. She's like, okay, done. So in 3 minutes, I had done an interview with the mogul of all media at the time and got the job. And I was like, so discombobulated. I went outside, smoked my cigarette, wrote a few friends, I think I have a new job, I don't know, And next thing you know, I'm launching HuffPost Live, this new live streaming network, which had its heyday and has since gone away, but served its purpose. And the point is, to answer your question, it was in that moment, Bill Clinton came up to me afterwards and we talked, and he said, "You're one of the most impressive Palestinians I've ever met." And I remember just looking into his eyes, and there's something that should be said, to his credit. He is one of the most charismatic people. Like, I totally understood in that moment why he had achieved, the success he has as president, why so many people were so taken with him. But I remember kind of feeling a sense of disbelief over where I was. Like, I wanted someone to kind of pinch me. I never felt like I would be in this crowd, let alone being praised by these people, let alone being asked by these people like Ariana that they needed me. I was always the one thinking I would need people like them to help me move forward. And there they were, asking for my time and my expertise and my knowledge. And so it was a humbling moment, but it was also a moment where I realized if you're authentic and if you're true to who you are, sky's the limit.
One more thing I want to ask you. What is your definition of success?
The older I get, the more experience I have, I realize that for me, success is being connected to your true purpose. Success is being authentic with yourself and with the people around you. And for me, the measure of success, while it might vary, some people, look, the truth is success is relative, like everything in this world. You asked me, your first question was, who is Ahmed Shihab-Eldin? Great question. But that question can be interpreted as Ahmed Shihab-Eldin is a talented producer, journalist who does this, who does this, who does that. But that's not who Ahmed Shihab-Eldin is. Who is Ahmed Shihab-Eldin beyond my name and beyond my career and beyond my accomplishments even? The soul of Ahmed Shihab-Eldin. And I know it sounds a bit cheesy or cliche, but when we talk about success, I think success is when your soul is whole and complete and purposeful. And we live in weird times, man. We live in times when people are constantly searching for meaning and purpose, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think we often search in the wrong places. We often search to be valid, to feel validated through external means. We look for external validation, whether it's accolades or money or prestige or a Hollywood star on the walk of whatever here in Hollywood. All these things that, have come to define what it means to be successful. And it's not to suggest that that's not success. But to me, you don't have to have money, you don't have to have power even, and you don't have to have fame. To be successful, you have to have respect. And the respect I'm talking about doesn't just mean that you're widely regarded and high value and high esteem and respected by others. It means you have to respect yourself. And the way to respect yourself is to tap into that essence and that purpose. And at the end of the day, the only thing that you leave behind that matters is your impact. Your impact on this world. This show is called Legendiary. What makes someone a legend? It's not money, it's not fame, it's not success in the way that we understand it. What makes you legendary, to me, is the people whose souls are going to live on forever and who will be remembered because of the impact they left on this world. Take the time to really get to know who you are. I've spent my life being so busy doing things, and fortunately, my heart was in the right place and one thing led to another, but I never took the time to think about why. And think about it honestly. Why do we do the things we do? Because therein lies what I would call the magic that can unleash not only your true potential, but the magic that will connect you to all the forces in this world that will get you to the exact place you are supposed to be. You know? Because when you start to get into the why, that's when success, to answer your original question, starts to matter.
Thank you. It was such an honor to be here with you today.
Cool, me
I
too.
learned so much, and I hope that the power that I'm feeling and the energy that I'm getting being here with you today, I hope it really portrays beyond the camera into the viewers live, because this is what we're trying to do, is to promote and help inspire others to go out of the societal constraints and identify with themselves and invest into trying to understand what is self-awareness, why are they doing what they do, and better their lives. And thank you so much for not only being here but bettering my life through this opportunity.
One thing I'm going to say in response. When I first got asked to teach, I was standing in front of the class. The first time I ever taught happened to be actually I taught a little bit of BU, but first time I ever got asked to teach, I was at Columbia, standing in front of the class. And at the end of my first class, I remember being on the subway home thinking to myself, wow, after being a student for so long, now that I'm a professor, it is insane that I learned more as a teacher than I did as a student. I'm not trying to stroke your ego or to reciprocate the compliment you just gave me, but when I met you, I already told you this, I was pleasantly surprised and grateful to find that for someone who claims to be so inspired by me, in the moment I met you, I was inspired by your drive and your ambition. Because, you know, we all enter points in our life where we need someone to kind of remind us, you know, what matters and who we are. And in a way, you did that for me too, so we're on the same page.